My name is Marcus. I'm 25, and I live in a quiet apartment complex in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the mountains loom like silent guardians, close enough to feel their presence, but far enough that the city's pulse feels like my own. I work from home as a graphic designer, crafting logos and brand identities for local businesses, boutique bakeries, independent bookstores, that sort of thing. It's not the life I imagined in art school, but it covers my bills and affords me the luxury of working in my pajamas. My existence has a certain rhythm, a comfortable predictability. I wake up, I design, maybe I'll take a drive up one of the canyons if the day feels too confining. I've never been one for big crowds or loud scenes. I suppose that's why my social circle has always been small and carefully managed. I had a serious relationship in college that lasted about a year before she told me I was living behind a one-way mirror. I could see out, but I never let anyone in. She had a point. I have my defenses and I've made peace with them. My best friend, Chris, however, is my polar opposite. He's also 25, works in tech sales, and possesses a charisma that could probably charm a statue into buying a software subscription. He's perpetually trying to pull me into his orbit of social events, brewery hopping, pick-up soccer games, weekend trips I never feel I have the social battery for. For the past year, his big thing has been Sunday dinners at his mum's house. "Marcus, you have to come," he'd say every week, his voice already buzzing with the energy of the weekend. "My mum's making that brisket. You can't miss it. It's a family thing, and you're basically family." I'd usually groan. Big family dinners weren't my scene. I'm more of a stay-in-with-my-laptop kind of guy than a make-small-talk-over-casserole one. But Chris is persistent. "Come on, man. It'll be good for you. You can't just live on takeout and Adobe Creative Cloud." I never had a solid reason to refuse, and to be honest, Chris has a knack for making you feel like you're letting life pass you by if you say no. So, every few Sundays, I'd find myself driving over to his mum's place in the suburbs. Chris's mum, Amelia, is 45. I've known her since Chris and I became friends in high school. She has always been something of an enigma. Not unfriendly, but not the type to offer you warm cookies and a hug either. There's a quiet intensity about her, a sense that she's observing the world from a deeper vantage point. I remember her picking Chris up from school in an old, impeccably maintained Volvo, always with a stack of art books or a sketchbook on the passenger seat. Chris once told me she used to be a curator for a gallery in Chicago before she moved here and started a landscape architecture firm. She has this long, silver-streaked blonde hair she usually wears in a loose knot, and these piercing blue eyes that seem to take in every detail. I never gave her much thought beyond her being Chris's mum. She was just a background figure in my friendship with him. Polite, poised, maybe a little aloof. She was beautiful, of course, but in an inaccessible way that you don't let your mind wander to. At least I didn't. Not until I started noticing the way she looked at me. It started subtly a few months ago. During the lively chaos of Sunday dinner, with Chris's aunts and cousins talking over each other, I'd feel a strange prickle on my skin. I'd look up from my plate and find her gaze on me from across the table. It wasn't a passing glance. It was focused, analytical, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. The first few times I dismissed it. But it kept happening. She'd be listening to her sister tell a story, but her eyes would be on me. She'd be pouring wine, but her attention felt fixed in my direction. I felt singled out, exposed, and I couldn't figure out why. Last Sunday, the feeling was more intense than ever. Her house was full, smelling of roasted garlic and fresh bread. Chris had invited a few other friends, loud and laughing, recounting stories from a hiking trip. I felt like a foreign object, as I often do in those settings. Chris was in his element, holding court, telling some exaggerated story. Amelia, however, was quieter. She sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of red wine, her red sweater a warm splash of colour in the softly lit room. She smiled when Chris made a joke. but her attention felt elsewhere. I caught her eye once, and instead of looking away, she held my gaze for a solid 3 seconds before giving me a slow, deliberate nod, as if she knew I wasn't there for the party either. It sent a jolt through me, a silent communication I couldn't decipher. By the end of the evening, I was exhausted. Chris and his friends were making plans to hit a bar downtown, their energy seemingly infinite. "You and Marcus coming?" Chris asked, grabbing his jacket. I shook my head. "Nah, man, I'm beat. Think I'll just head home." He shrugged, already halfway out the door with his crew. I grabbed my coat and was about to make my own exit, offering a polite goodbye to the remaining family members. That's when Amelia walked over, her boots making a soft sound on the hardwood floor. "Not joining them?" she asked, her voice low but clear over the lingering chatter. I looked up, caught off guard by her directness. "Not really my scene." "You." She offered a faint smile, adjusting the sleeves of her sweater. "I'd rather have a quiet house than a loud bar." Something about her delivery made me smile. "Well, I should probably get going and let you have it," I said, starting towards the door. She tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Actually, Marcus, before you go, could you give me a hand with something? The window in my study has been sticking. I can't seem to get it open." Her request was simple, neighborly, but it felt charged with something else. "Sure," I found myself saying. "Let me just put my coat down." We walked down a quiet hallway to her study. The room was lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes on art history and botany. A large oak desk faced a wide window overlooking her dark, manicured garden. The air smelled of old paper and faint, earthy soil. It felt like her sanctuary. "It's this one," she said, gesturing to the window latch. "It gets jammed when the weather changes." I stepped over to it, my shoulder brushing hers as I passed. I worked the latch, putting some muscle into it, and after a moment it gave way with a soft click. I slid the window open, and a rush of cool night air filled the room. "There you go," I said, turning back to her. She was standing a few feet away, leaning against her desk, but she wasn't looking at the window. She was looking at me, with that same intense, unreadable expression. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant sound of a car passing on the street. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was my chance, my opening. I had to ask. "Amelia," I started, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Can I ask you something?" She didn't seem surprised. She just nodded, her blue eyes never leaving my face. "Why do you always stare at me?" The question hung in the air of her study, stark and direct. The cool night breeze from the open window brushed against my skin, but it did little to quell the heat rising in my chest. I had expected her to be taken aback, maybe to deny it or laugh it off as my imagination. But she didn't. She held my gaze, her expression shifting from analytical to something softer, more vulnerable. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, then closed again. She pushed a loose strand of hair from her face, a small human gesture that seemed out of place with the poised woman I thought I knew. "I'm still figuring that out," she finally replied, her voice barely a whisper, yet it landed with the weight of a profound confession. Her answer wasn't an explanation, but it was an admission. It was real. I hadn't been imagining it. My own breath, which I hadn't realized I was holding, escaped in a slow exhale. I leaned against the windowsill, creating a bit of distance, trying to process the strange mix of validation and deeper confusion her words stirred in me. "Figuring what out?" I asked, my voice softer now. She pushed off the desk and walked slowly toward the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books. It was a nervous gesture, a way to occupy her hands while her mind worked. "When I was a curator," she began, her back still to me, "my job was to look, not just to see a piece of art, but to understand it, the composition, the history, the emotion the artist was trying to convey. You learn to recognize patterns, to see the story beneath the surface." She turned around, her arms crossed over her chest, a protective posture. "When you first started coming to these dinners, you were just Chris's friend. Quiet, polite. You fit into the background." She paused, her eyes searching my face as if looking for a reaction. "But then I started noticing things. The way you hold yourself in a crowd, like you're observing everyone else from behind a wall. The way you listen more than you speak. But when you do say something, it's thoughtful. It's measured." Her words struck me with unnerving accuracy. She wasn't just seeing me, she was reading me. "There's a stillness about you, Marcus," she continued, taking a step closer. "In a house full of noise and chaos, you have this quiet center, and I find myself drawn to it. I look at you, and I feel like I'm seeing a story that hasn't been fully told yet, and I'm trying to understand it." Her confession left me speechless. I'd spent most of my life feeling invisible or misunderstood, and here was this woman, my best friend's mother, articulating the very essence of my being with an artist's precision. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the weight of her honesty. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," she added, a note of apology in her tone. It's been a long time since I met someone who made me want to look closer." I pushed myself off the windowsill, closing the distance between us until only a few feet remained. "You don't make me uncomfortable," I said, the words truer than I'd realized until I spoke them. "You make me feel seen, and I don't know what to do with that." For the first time, I wasn't just looking at Chris's mum. Her hair, usually so perfectly arranged, had strands escaping from its knot, framing a face that showed faint lines of exhaustion, and something else, something raw. Her eyes, which I had always seen as cool and distant, now held a warmth, a flicker of a shared loneliness. In that moment, she wasn't the composed matriarch of the Sunday dinners. She was just Amelia, a woman standing in her study, admitting to a curiosity she couldn't explain. "Okay," I said, taking a slow breath. "What do we do?" She looked around the room, at her books, her desk, the life she had so carefully curated. "I think," she said, her voice steadying, "I've spent the last decade being Chris's mum. After his father and I divorced, my world became about providing stability, about being the strong one. My career, this house, these dinners, it's all part of a structure I built to keep things from falling apart." Her gaze returned to me, sharp and clear. But somewhere in building that structure, I think I walled myself in. I forgot what it felt like to be just Amelia. A person, not a role. She took another step, her hand rising as if to touch my arm, then falling back to her side. We were so close now I could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume, something like sandalwood and rain. The tension between us was a physical thing, a current humming in the small space. We argued a little then, not in anger, but in a tense, fumbling dance of vulnerability. I insisted she didn't owe me an explanation, that it was fine. She insisted she wanted to give one, that she was tired of keeping everything inside. "Marcus, you don't get it," she said, her voice firm but not harsh. "It's not about you. It's about me. You just happened to be the one who made me realize I was staring because I was looking for something I'd lost in myself." I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped. She was right. I was letting my own discomfort drive the conversation, and it wasn't helping. I reached out, almost without thinking, and placed my hand gently on her arm. Okay, I said. I'm listening. Her skin was warm under my touch, and her muscles tensed for a second before relaxing. Her fingers brushed against mine, a brief electric contact. And in that small gesture, the cool night air from the window felt a little less sharp. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that had just been said, with years of unspoken feelings. The world outside, the city, Chris, the life I was supposed to be living, faded away until there was only this room, this moment. Just when I thought the tension was unbearable, that one of us had to break it and leave. Amelia looked up at me, her eyes shining with a startling clarity. "There," she said, her voice sharp with a sudden realization. "That's why." I looked at her, confused, and saw it, the faint outline of a smile on her lips. It was our only shot at understanding, and we both knew it. The study felt like an island, a small, quiet shelter from the rest of the world. The only light came from a dim lamp on her desk, casting long shadows that made the room feel both intimate and vast. The cool air from the open window mingled with the warm, bookish scent of the space. Amelia stood before me, my hand still resting on her arm, the warmth of her skin a grounding presence. Her words, "That's why," echoed in my mind, a puzzle I was desperate to solve. "Why what?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She looked down at my hand on her arm, then back up to my face. Her blue eyes were clear, the earlier uncertainty replaced by a sudden, resolute calm. "That," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "The way you reached out. You didn't pull away, you didn't get defensive, you just listened, you stayed." She took a small breath, and the story she'd been holding back began to unfold, not in a rush, but in careful, deliberate pieces. "My ex-husband, he was a good man, but he never knew how to be still. He was always moving, always planning the next thing. He saw my quietness as something to be fixed, a problem to be solved." She gestured around the room, at the books, the carefully organized desk. "He never understood this part of me. He never wanted to." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of a book on her desk. "I learned to keep this world," she said, her voice quiet. "Separate. To keep myself separate. It was easier than trying to explain it to someone who didn't want to understand." I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard her speak with such unguarded honesty. Not with Chris, not with anyone. Her words hung in the air, heavy with a loneliness that resonated deep within my own chest. I shifted closer, my arm brushing hers. "I get it," I said finally, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Feeling like you have to keep the real you locked away. She looked at me, her eyes catching the lamplight, and for a second I saw the raw, unshielded truth of her. "Most people don't," she said. "They see the house, the successful business, the happy son. They don't see the person who built it all because she was afraid of being alone inside it." I tightened my grip on her arm, a wordless gesture of support. Her fingers were steady now, and she didn't pull away. "You don't have to be alone in here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Not right now." She didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, a slow smile touched her lips, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her face. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice soft, "for being here." The lamplight danced across her features, highlighting the lines of past struggles, but also something vibrant, something that had been dormant and was now stirring to life. I let go of her arm, feeling suddenly self-conscious, and took off my jacket, draping it over the back of a nearby chair. It felt like a clumsy, inadequate gesture. She looked at me, surprised, then gave a small nod, her smile lingering. "You're going to be cold," she said. but there was no real protest in her voice. I shrugged, trying to play it off. I'll survive. But inside, my chest was tight, not from the cold, but from the way she looked at me. Like I wasn't just Chris's quiet friend, like I was someone who saw her, someone who mattered. We stood there, the lamplight flickering, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the space between us felt smaller and more charged than it ever had. I didn't know what was happening, not exactly, but I knew it wasn't just about her staring at me anymore. It was about what we both saw when we looked at each other. The fire of connection had been lit, casting a warm, flickering glow across the quiet study. The heat felt like a revelation, pushing back the chill of isolation that had settled into my bones. The lamp on her desk popped softly, filling the silence, and for a moment we just stood there, catching our breath, letting the shared vulnerability sink in. The lamp on the desk hummed softly, its warm glow pushing shadows across the spines of her books. The night air drifting through the window was cool, but inside the study, the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken admissions. Amelia was close to me, our arms occasionally brushing as she moved around the small space, a silent dance of proximity. My jacket was still draped over the chair, a tangible piece of me left in her sanctuary. The faint smell of sandalwood from her perfume mixed with the scent of old paper and the cool, earthy fragrance of the night. Her hand, which had felt so warm under mine, was now tucked into the pocket of her pants, but the memory of the contact lingered. Neither of us had moved to leave, and the silence that had fallen wasn't empty. It was full, holding the weight of everything we hadn't named yet. I watched her, the lamplight catching the curve of her cheek, the silver strands in her blonde hair shining like threads of moonlight. She was pacing slowly, looking at the art prints on her walls as if seeing them for the first time. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice low, careful not to shatter the fragile atmosphere we had built. She stopped, turning to me, and for a moment her guard was down completely, her expression open and searching. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't let myself feel anything but fine in a very long time." She shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing against a tall stack of books, and the top one slid off, landing on the floor with a soft thud. I bent to pick it up, my fingers grazing hers as she reached for it too. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let her hand rest on mine for a beat longer than necessary. "When I was building my business," she said, her voice slow, deliberate, "I saw what most people don't. The risks, the failures, the people who told me a single mother couldn't make it. I learned to keep moving, to keep designing, because if I stopped, the doubt would swallow me whole. And after the divorce, I kept moving for Chris, for us. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to stop, how to just be." Her words hit me with an unexpected force. I had always perceived her as a pillar of strength, untouchable, the kind of person who had life figured out. But now, standing here in her quiet study, she was just Amelia. Not Chris's mom, not the successful architect, not the woman who kept everything perfectly in order. She was someone who had been carrying an immense weight for far too long. I straightened up, the book still in my hand, and tightened my grip on it, not sure if I was trying to comfort her or ground myself. "You don't have to keep everything together now," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Not here. Not with me." She turned to face me fully, her eyes searching mine, and the air between us shifted, like a lock clicking open. "Marcus," she said, her voice softer now, almost fragile. "If this is just one night, if this conversation is all we get, I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to be Chris's mom or the strong one, or the one who's always fine. I just want to be me, a woman, Someone who's still here, still breathing. Her words hung there, raw and vulnerable, and my chest constricted. I could see it in her eyes. The years of solitude she'd endured, the deep longing to be seen for something other than the roles she played. "I see you," I said, the words spilling out before I could filter them. "Not as Chris's mum, not as anything else, just you." Her breath hitched, and for a long moment neither of us moved. The lamp hummed. A siren wailed in the distant city. But the world felt like it had shrunk to the space between us. This study. This moment, I don't know who leaned in first. Maybe it was her, maybe it was me. But our faces were closer now, her breath warm against my cheek. Her eyes held mine, steady but exposed. And then her lips brushed against mine. Soft at first, hesitant, like she was testing the edge of something she'd long forgotten. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, not rushed or desperate, but like we were both trying to communicate something that words couldn't capture. Her hand slid up my arm, resting on my shoulder, and I pulled her closer, the book I was holding falling unnoticed to the floor. It wasn't about passion or heat in that moment. It was about connection, about two isolated people finding something real in the quiet of a Sunday night. Her lips were warm, tasting faintly of red wine. And for those few seconds, the cold, the fear, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just us, tangled in the quiet truth of what we both needed. We pulled back, our foreheads resting together, our breaths mingling in the dim light. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling, but not with fear. "I haven't felt this alive in years." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her, my hand resting on the back of her neck, feeling the soft strands of her hair. "Me neither," I said finally, my voice barely audible. I realized then that I had been just as lost as she was, not in a storm, but in my own life, designing away in my apartment, keeping everyone at a safe distance. But here, with her, I wasn't hiding anymore. We didn't say much after that. The lamp kept burning, casting long shadows, and we stood there, closer than before, her head resting against my shoulder. The weight of her stare no longer felt like a question, but an answer. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The lamp in the study had become our steady, silent witness, its warm glow spreading through the small space as the city outside grew quieter. Amelia and I stood close, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. The kiss lingered in the air between us, not as an awkward memory, but as the moment that had shifted everything. It had transformed her from Chris's mother into a woman who was fragile and real, someone who needed the same thing I did, to feel a genuine connection, even if it was just for one night. We didn't go further. There was no urgency, no need to push past the profound intimacy we had already discovered. Instead, we stayed there, her body leaning against mine for support, a silent acknowledgement of our shared vulnerability. I could feel the steady rise and fall of her breath, and the faint tremor I'd felt in her arm had ceased. The lamplight danced across her face, softening the lines of exhaustion. And for a moment, she looked younger, not in years, but in the way she had let her defenses fall, like she was finally allowing herself to rest. I shifted slightly, my arm draping over her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. It was a closeness that transcended words, a quiet embrace that communicated more than any conversation could. At some point, we sank onto the small sofa tucked in the corner of her study, not fully sitting, but leaning against each other in the hazy space between awareness and exhaustion. The lamp hummed softly, and the world felt miles away. I must have drifted off because I woke once to the feeling of my neck being stiff from the awkward angle, I found Amelia still pressed against me, her breath warm against my collar. Her hair smelled faintly of her perfume and the night air, and I didn't move, not wanting to break the spell. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and for a second we just looked at each other in the dim light. "You're still here," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," I said softly. "Not going anywhere." She gave a small nod, her lips curving into a faint smile, and closed her eyes again. We talked a little through the night, in fragmented sentences whenever one of us shifted or the house creaked. She told me about a painting she'd seen once in a gallery in Florence, of a woman staring out a window, her face a mask of longing. "It was the only time a piece of art made me cry," she said. "Not because it was sad, but because it was so honest about being trapped." I told her about the time I spent a week designing a logo for a small, non-profit community garden, and the joy I felt when I saw it on their sign, something I'd created that was part of the world. "I don't tell people about that," I admitted. "It feels too small to matter." She shook her head, her hand resting on my arm. "Nothing's small if it makes you feel like you belong." The hours passed like that, in quiet exchanges and long stretches of silence that didn't feel heavy. I don't know when we fell asleep for real, but when I woke again, the first hint of grey dawn was seeping through the study window. The lamp was still on, but its light looked pale and weak against the coming day. The air was colder now, sharp against my face. Amelia was still beside me, her head on my shoulder, one hand tucked against my chest. I didn't want to move, didn't want to let go of this fragile moment, but the real world was returning, and I could feel it. Then we heard it, the sound of a key in the front door, followed by Chris's voice calling out, "Mom! You up?" My heart jumped. Relief mixed with something else, something like regret. Amelia stirred, lifting her head, her eyes blinking against the morning light. "He's back," she said, her voice soft but steady. She sat up slowly, pulling away from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The sound of Chris's footsteps grew louder as he came down the hall. I stood, my legs stiff, and helped her up. Her hand lingered in mine, warm and firm, and she squeezed it once, hard, before letting go. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her eyes meeting mine, steady but unreadable now. "For last night." I didn't know what to say. The weight of what had happened, what we had shared, was still settling in my chest. "You don't have to thank me," I said finally. "I'm glad it was us." She nodded, her lips pressing into a small, sad smile. And then she turned to straighten a stack of books on her desk, her back to me as Chris appeared in the doorway. The study felt smaller now, like the world outside was already crowding in. I grabbed my jacket from the chair, the fabric cool to the touch, and stepped out of her sanctuary and back into the light of day. Chris's voice filled the hallway as I left, his casual questions about the stuck window a stark contrast to the profound silence I was leaving behind. Amelia's hand brushed mine one last time as I passed, a fleeting touch, and then she stepped back, her face composed, ready to meet the morning. Chris was standing in the hallway, looking between me and his mum with a sleepy, confused expression. "Window all good?" he asked, yawning. Amelia moved past me, her posture suddenly straight, her voice smooth and maternal. "All fixed. Marcus was a huge help." She was already pulling herself back into the role of Chris's mum, the composed woman who ran this house. I wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge the world we had just left behind in her study, but the words were lodged in my throat as Chris clapped me on the shoulder. "Dude, you're a lifesaver. She's been complaining about that thing for weeks." He was oblivious, his mind on coffee and the day ahead. Amelia was already in the kitchen, the sounds of a coffee maker starting up creating a jarringly normal backdrop. She didn't look at me. I mumbled something about needing to get home and made my way to the front door, my legs feeling heavy. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the rising sun casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street, I felt the weight of leaving that small, warm space behind. The study, the lamplight, the night with Amelia. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression polite but distant. When our eyes met for a split second, I saw it, a flicker of the woman from last night, a silent acknowledgement of something that only we knew. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, then turned back inside, closing the door softly behind her. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My mind was still in her study, replaying our conversation, the feel of her hand in mine, the soft pressure of her lips. The city was waking up, but I felt like I was moving through a dream. Back in my apartment, life snapped back to its usual rhythm, but it no longer fit. I sat at my desk, staring at a half-finished logo, but the colors seemed dull, the lines meaningless. My quiet, orderly apartment, once my refuge, now felt empty and hollow. I texted Amelia a few days later, my thumb hovering over the screen for a long time before I typed a simple, "Are you okay?" Hours passed. No reply. I tried again a week later, my heart pounding as I asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime, maybe talk. This time, a reply came back almost instantly. "Thank you, Marcus, but I'm very busy with a new project. It was kind of you to help with the window." It was polite, dismissive, and it stung more than silence would have. I started second-guessing everything. The kiss, the way she had leaned into me, the words she'd said about wanting to be seen. Maybe I had read it all wrong. Maybe, in the light of day, she regretted it. The next Sunday, I couldn't bring myself to go to dinner. I made an excuse about a deadline, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. The Sunday after that, I forced myself to go, needing some kind of answer, even a silent one. When I got there, the house was full of the usual noise and laughter. Amelia was in the kitchen, looking elegant and composed. She smiled politely when she saw me. "Marcus, so good of you to come." She was Chris's mum again, the woman who kept everything in check. Throughout the dinner she avoided my gaze, her attention carefully divided among her other guests. I felt a cold knot of disappointment tighten in my stomach. Then, as I was helping clear the table, I saw it. On the mantelpiece in the living room, next to a collection of family photos, was a small framed botanical print I didn't recognize. It was a detailed illustration of a night-blooming cereus, a flower that blossoms only once, in the dark, and then wilts by morning. We had talked about it that night, after I'd mentioned a documentary I'd seen. It hit me like a punch to the gut. That was our night, our conversation, captured in a way only she would understand. I stared at it, my chest tight, until Chris's voice snapped me out of it. "Yo, Marcus, you good? You're staring at that flower like it owes you money." I forced a laugh. "Just an interesting plant. Didn't know your mum was into botany like that." He shrugged. "Yeah, she's always got some new, weird thing she's obsessed with." I stayed for the rest of the evening, but my mind wasn't there. All I could think about was that flower, that one night, and the way Amelia had looked at me in the lamplight. As I was leaving, Chris walked me to the door. "Hey, you sure you're okay? You've been weird since you stayed over to fix that window." I turned, meeting his eyes, and for a second, I wondered if he suspected something. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "Just tired." But as I walked to my car, the weight of that night settled deeper, a quiet ache that wouldn't leave. The drive back to my apartment was silent, the familiar streets of Salt Lake City glowing under the amber streetlights. Chris's words echoed in my head, but it was the image of that framed flower, the night-blooming cereus, that wouldn't let me go. It was as if Amelia had taken our night, our secret, and transformed it into a piece of art, something tangible she could keep without ever having to speak of it. I wanted to believe it meant she hadn't forgotten, that she felt the same pull I did, but her polite distance told a different story. Days bled into weeks, and the ache in my chest became a familiar companion. I kept designing, kept to my routine, kept living my life. But it felt like I was moving through a muted world. Nothing was quite as sharp or clear as it had been in that study. I didn't try to contact her again. I told myself it was for the best, that whatever had happened between us was a fleeting moment, not the beginning of a story. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her blue eyes catching the lamplight, her voice soft and raw, admitting she just wanted to be seen. I saw the way her hand had curled around mine, the way she'd smiled when I listened. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way we had held on to each other, like two people finding shelter in a storm they didn't know they were in. One evening, about 2 months after that night, I came home from a long walk, my mind feeling clearer than it had in weeks. There was a small flat package on my doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address, no note on the outside. My heart stuttered as I picked it up, its weight light but deliberate. Inside my apartment, I carefully tore it open. It was the botanical print from her mantelpiece, the night-blooming cereus, framed in simple, dark wood. Tucked behind it was a piece of heavy cardstock, her handwriting clean and precise. Not the last night, it read, but not the first either. I know where you live if I need a window fixed. I stood there holding the print, my pulse loud in my ears. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly, but it was something more. A door left, cracked open. A possibility. I ran my thumb over the glass, over the image of the flower that bloomed in the dark. For a moment I was back in that study, her head on my shoulder, the lamp humming softly. The note wasn't a promise, but it was enough. It told me she hadn't forgotten, that the night we had shared had left its mark on her, too. I didn't see Amelia again for a while. Life continued its forward march. Chris started dating someone seriously, and the Sunday dinners became less frequent. I threw myself into a new project, a complete rebranding for a local arts council, something that kept me busy enough to quiet my thoughts. But I hung the print on the wall in my living room, opposite my desk. It wasn't a trophy or a memento. It was a reminder that some moments don't need to last forever to change you. They just need to happen. Sometimes I'd be driving and find myself on her street, not to stop, just to see if her car was in the driveway. Most of the time it was, and I'd feel a strange mix of relief and longing, as if knowing she was there was enough, even if I couldn't reach her. Once I saw her in her front yard, tending to her garden, her hair tied back, her movements slow and focused. She didn't see me, and I didn't stop. But I smiled, because she looked at peace, like she was finding her way back to herself. The truth is, I didn't need her to show up at my door. I didn't need us to pick up where we left off, to steal more moments or make promises we couldn't keep. That night in her study had given me something I hadn't realized I was missing. A glimpse of what it felt like to truly see someone else's walls come down and know they trusted you not to run. Amelia had shown me that, not just in her words or her touch, but in the way she'd let me see her, really see her, without the armor she wore for the world. I don't know if our paths will cross again in the way they did that night. Maybe she'll always be Chris's mom, the elegant woman who smiles politely from across a crowded room. Or maybe one day there will be a knock on my door, and we'll find out what comes next. But for now, I carry that night with me, not as a weight, but as a warmth, like the lamplight we shared. It wasn't love in the way people write songs about. It was quieter, more complex, more real. It was about two people finding each other in the stillness, not because they had to, but because they chose to. I looked at the print on my wall, at the impossible flower. And I smiled, not because I had an answer, but because I finally understood the question. That was enough. For now it had to be.